The World Junior roster for Team Canada has been officially released. And folks, I have a lot of thoughts about this. Some good thoughts and some extraordinarily bad. You'll see what I mean in a second, but what the heck is Team Canada thinking with this World Junior roster? What would I have changed? And what were the biggest surprises and snubs? Well, make sure you watch till the end for all the hockey prospect talk and all the World Junior talk as well over the next month, presented by BetUS. And that's a good segue to talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, great friends of the channel. And if you want to make picks for this hockey season, BetUS is the place to do so, not just on NHL games, but they also have the World Junior predictions and odds released for the gold medal winner. Right now, you have Canada and Sweden at plus 300, but the US at plus 600, I think is pretty good odds, honestly. I don't think they're the favorite, but they are in the mix. And if you were to put $5 down, you could win 30. If you're picking Canada, though, right now, if you put $20 down, you can win 60 by the end of things. So a lot of opportunities there. They also got odds as well for the first overall pick with James Higgins and the rest of the field there as options there. So if you want to make your picks for the IIHF World Juniors for the rest of the hockey season for the NHL draft, BetUS is the place to do so. Just use code YouTube150 and you'll get an 150% incentive bonus on your first deposit and 125% incentive bonus on your next two deposits after that. But let's get into the preliminary World Junior roster for Team Canada. There is so much to talk about here, and I guess to give some context for you guys, this is just the preliminary roster. This isn't the finalized one. We will see over the next few weeks Team Canada, as camp goes on, them whittling down this team and eventually getting to a much lower number. But for now, there is a lot to talk about. Usually the most interesting part is when the final roster is released and we see the cuts that Team Canada made, but no, there were so many snubs just for the preliminary roster this year that I needed to talk about. So as you can see, even though Team Canada put 32 names on their roster, 32 different guys, there is still so much controversy. Now we're going to go through the preliminary roster, read out the names, and then we're going to go through the surprises and snubs. Of course, on the goaltending side, you got Bjarnason, George, Ivankovic, Razlav. On the defense, you got Allen, Akey, Bonk, Brunicky, Dickinson, Gibson, Molendijk, Minio, Price, and Schaefer. On the forward side, you got Denver, Barkey, Baudouin, Cataford, Catton, Cowan, Crystal, Gauthier, Height, Howluchenko, Martone, McKenna, Nadeau, Pinelli, Rekoff, Richie, Wood, and then finally, Braden Yeager. Now we're going to start with the surprises, then go into the snubs. But first, I want to talk about a big surprise in the goaltending side, that being Jack Ivankovic being a part of not just the preliminary roster, but potentially on track to get a spot on the final one. Of course, there was a pretty big expectation that Joshua Ravensbergen, likely the best goaltender in this draft, or at least the highest picked goalie in this draft, would be a part of this roster. And if either of Ivankovic or Ravensbergen, two 2025 draft eligibles, were to be on this team, everybody would have predicted Ravensbergen to be the guy. As Chris Peters says, the 2025 draft eligible Ivankovic is on the roster. Ravensbergen, who was in the summer showcase, is not. Now, Danny, it is true that Ravensbergen wasn't comfortable in that type of position, but at the same time, Canada had given faith to Ravensbergen before in the previous tournament, and now we see Ivankovic here instead. We've seen over the years, though, Canada kind of snubs some of these smaller goaltenders out there, at least when it comes to some of the younger goalies that are in the potential pool. So the fact that Canada went with a 5'11 goaltender in Ivankovic over Ravensbergen says a lot to Ivankovic's skill level. You could absolutely make the case that he's the best goaltending prospect in this draft. A 902 save percentage with Brampton in 18 games so far. He's somebody that is right up there. I don't think it's a total snub by any means, but it was very surprising. I would have gone Ravensbergen, and it's pretty surprising to see Canada, of all teams, snub a 6'5" goalie. Now, were either of these two goalies going to even play a game at the World Juniors? I'm not so sure. You got, of course, Razlav there as likely starter, but even Carter George has a good chance there, and as a backup, he would be absolutely the next man up. So I doubt that either of them would have played games. I don't think it was going to be that impactful of a choice, but still has implications for this NHL draft. Now going on to the defensemen, and there were a lot of surprises in this group. First, you had Cameron Allen to me, who I'm a Guelph Storm fan. As you guys can see back in the background, I had a Guelph Storm jersey back there. I mean, Cam Allen has improved leaps and bounds over where he was just a year ago. You can see back in 2024, 9 points in 25 games, already hovering around that point per game mark. But I just don't really see Cam Allen as a player that is going to be more impactful than a Zane Parekh or a Carter Yakemchuk, and trust me, we will get into those too. And even though I think Allen is a fine defenseman, I just don't really think he is better in the mobility and the puck moving ability than some of the guys that Canada left off the preliminary roster. It's shocking that they invited Allen there, yet top 10 guys are snubbed. Maybe it's an age issue, perhaps, but honestly, I just don't really see the reasoning. Now, a pretty equal surprise, but a much more pleasant one to me was Bo Akey being a part of this roster. I just didn't really see with the health issues he had last year, being a player that can immediately jump under the roster. I think he's had a solid start so far this season with Barry, 16 points in 22 games. But again, even though I like Bo Akey, over some of the guys they snubbed is pretty insane. Still though, I think he could be a very solid bottom pair, maybe 7th defenseman that can use his skating, use the puck moving ability very well. I would rather have Akey in the lineup than Cam Allen, that's for sure, but I don't really see either of them as players I would have invited. Another pleasant surprise though was Matthew Schaefer, and Cam Allen, Bo Akey, they're solid defensemen. Matthew Schaefer though has been excellent so far to start out this season. 18 points in 14 games of Erie was of course great at that CHL and TDP showcase. I'm not really surprised. If it was my personal opinion, I probably would have had Schaefer on this team. I'm surprised though that Canada had him here. I mean, we'll get into again some of those snubs there, but much older defensemen that you would have likely predicted to be on this team are not here. Yet Matthew Schaefer, who's one of the youngest defensemen, not even just that, one of the youngest players in this draft class, is on this team and on at least on the preliminary roster, and I would not be surprised if he ends up making it. I knew that Canada loved this dude, and obviously for very good reason. I just thought the age would be an issue for him and would make it so where he would be pushed to next year's World Junior team. But the fact that he's here already on the preliminary roster ahead of some of the top 10 names we saw last year shows how good Schaefer is. Now going on to the forward group and some good names to see. Both Andrew Crystal and Riley Heidt are here, which I think is a good choice. These are two 5'11 wingers that I wasn't quite sure will make the roster, and there is still time for them to potentially get cut, but I'm good to see them here. It's good to see them here because of the high octane offense that both of these guys bring. I mean, you can see the season that Andrew Crystal is having. It's otherworldly numbers, 47 points in 18 WHL games. Riley Heidt is also having a great season, 34 points in 20 games, only on pace for 105 points, pretty much nothing in his case, while Crystal is on pace for 162. But both of these guys, I think, deserve to be here. I think there is the potential still that they could get snubbed from the final roster, but in terms of actual offensive impact, these are two great players that Canada should be using, and hopefully will be in the end. One massive surprise to me was Tanner Howe, and we'll get into Iginla and why he wasn't there. It baffles me, honestly, that Iginla isn't on this roster, yet Tanner Howe is. I think maybe the only reason is because of age, but I think Iginla is a much better power forward than Howe is, even though he's a solid one. I mean, he's a good player, don't get me wrong. I think he could be a valuable extra forward, fourth line piece, but I just don't really see him making the roster over a player like Iginla, who I think could have been the perfect fourth line player for Canada this year. In Howe's case, though, it's good to see him there, but I mean, I would never invited him even to the preliminary roster. I just don't think he's that type of player. But that's enough with the surprises that actually made it. Let's talk about the snubs for this Team Canada roster, because this is genuinely one of the biggest snub lists I have seen for a preliminary roster ever. Now, this does go to show just how deep Canada is this year, that they can even afford to snub these type of guys, and I think still be the favorite in this tournament. But wowzers, there is just so much to talk about. Let's first go on to the forward group, and I think the big one is Beckett Sennecke, who I was expecting to man a top 6 role on this Canada team, yet isn't even invited to preliminary camp, which I think is just mind-blowing. I mean, I think the least you could do is invite him over, see what he's capable of, and if he isn't up to snuff, then maybe he's up to next year. But he's not even on the preliminary camp after being drafted 3rd overall. And sure, he had an injury heading into the season, and maybe that's something that Canada's maybe worried about lingering, but you can see in his return so far, he's been doing just fine. In 23 games, 19 goals, 17 assists, 36 points with Oshawa. He has been dynamic, and especially over the last couple weeks, has been absolutely brilliant. So I just don't understand the reasoning here. Maybe it's another age thing, but also he's good. Why not put him there? Why not give him a chance? I mean, Tanner Howe above him? I like Tanner Howe as a player, but what are we doing here? And you guys know I wasn't even the biggest Beckett Sennecke guy. I had him outside my top 10. I thought he had some great individual moments, some great plays on the rush, but still needed to develop some more. But we've seen a lot of that development so far to start out this season, even with that injury. So this just confuses me, to be honest. Another one that surprised me quite a bit was Iginla, not seeing him on this roster. It's a little bit less surprising given the age, him just turning 18 this last August. But again, if it was my roster, I'd immediately have him as my 4th line left wing. I don't think you can can get a more perfect fourth line winger for a World Junior than Iginla. He can bring some offense, bring some firepower with his shot, but also bring the power forward ability, the muscle there, and just do so much for you. And it's not even like his start has been bad either. He's on pace for 99 points, 32 points, 14 goals in 21 WHL games so far. He's been a monster for Kelowna. There's been no issues there. So even though I wouldn't have been completely shocked if he was off the roster, did not even see him in the preliminary. I thought he would have been the ideal Hockey Canada fourth liner, but I guess not this year. He'll absolutely be there next season, or else I will start a riot. Another snub to me, and somebody that I absolutely would have invited, is Liam Greentree, who is somebody I think also up that Iginla alley, could have been really interesting as a fourth liner, or maybe even just an extra forward, kind of in that Carson Rakoff type role. Considering how good he's been in the OHL this season, it's genuinely shocking to see him not on the list. I mean, he's of course a captain for Windsor, but this year in 26 games and 17 goals, 44 points, he's been an absolute machine. I could kind of get, because of some of the skating issues, maybe not wanting him for the bigger ice there that of course the World Junior provides. Maybe that's something that Canada is projecting. In terms of the player there though, I would have given him a look at camp to see if he can be up to that speed, to see if he can build some chemistry with some other players. To not see him on the preliminary roster at all, I think is a mistake. If he wasn't on the roster at the end of things, I could see why, but just give him a shot at least, especially with how dynamic he has been so far. Another one that I was a little bit surprised to not see here, especially considering Porter Martone's on the list, is Michael Misa. Now, I think for a Canada World Junior at this stage, I could see why they would prefer Martone on the final roster, but it is kind of surprising to also see Misa off the list considering how unbelievable he has been this year. Almost a 2-point per game in his draft year in the OHL is ridiculous. He's on pace for 131 points. He has 25 goals, 49 points in 25 games, just about as good as you could ever possibly hope for any OHL player. He has been on a different level. Another player like Greentree that I would have given a chance to, but again, I get there's a limited amount of spots. I just think for at least if we're going off merit, if we're going off who the best players are this year and how they're playing, the level they're at, Misa is, I think, one of the best choices out there, and at least I would have given him a chance. He might not have been there at the end, but man, his point totals, his just consistency this year, I think would have been hard for me to leave off. But I do get it. If Canada were to select one, especially for an extra forward, fourth line role, Porter Martone makes more sense considering how nasty of a player he can be and how hard he can be to play against. But still, if we're talking about preliminary rosters, getting an invite to camp, Misa, I think, should also be there. Now let's move on to the defense, which had its own share of interesting ones. One that I was actually really surprised to see, almost more than anybody else, was Noah Chadwick. And you might be surprised to see that, but he was somebody that I thought was getting a lot of interest by Canada leading up to this tournament. I thought was going to be in that defensive, mobile role that Canada always loves to bring. A name that, of course, isn't going to be getting all the attention in the world. Just a 6th-round pick by the Leafs in 2023, but I think is one of the better defensive players that Canada could have brought. He's somebody, though, that hasn't had the greatest season in the world by any means, but I thought because of just how consistent he can be, how much of a defensive force I think he could have been for Canada, especially in a bottom pair role, it was surprising to see, especially with his size, that he wasn't even brought to the roster. But of course, we get into the two names that are the most surprising on that defense. Let's first start out with Zane Parekh, which I think is just simply ridiculous to not have here, honestly. It does seem like Matthew Schaefer beat out Zane Parekh, and of course Yakemchuk we'll get into, but I think in Parekh's case, he still absolutely deserves to be there. He's somebody that has put up unreal point totals over the last couple of years. I have my issues, of course, with his positioning, with some of the defensive reads there, but with what he can do on offense, with how dynamic of a power play force he can be, I'm shocked to see him there off of it, honestly. I'm shocked to not have him on that power play, quarterbacking on the PP1. I think that would have been a gimme, but I guess not. And then you have Carter Yakemchuk, which you guys know I've had my fair issues with defensively, and it was a reason why he was outside the top 20 in my draft rankings, and it was a reason why I didn't really love the pick by Ottawa back at 7th overall, but he was somebody I was absolutely expecting to be there. I thought at least he would be an extra defenseman if they couldn't find a way to fit him into that in that top 6. If they had other offensive defensemen that they wanted to have more, I thought that would have been the least that we'd see. He'd still be on the preliminary roster, he would still make the opening roster, and we'd see from there where he were to play. I think he absolutely could have been in that top 6, could have been potentially on that bottom pair, maybe even that middle pair perhaps, but to not see Yakemchuk here is honestly pretty insane, which means we'll never see him in a World Juniors because considering he'll age out after next year, and that's honestly a big surprise to me. Now, I don't think he's had the greatest start to the season in the world, especially defensively. offensively, where I still think there's been that major issue, and that's maybe been the big thing that's held him back. The consistent defensive issues that he runs into, the reads, the quick decision making, or the lack thereof, has come to bite him, and maybe that's why Canada's left him off the roster. But still, considering the offensive potential, I'm a Yakemchuk. I consider myself a Yakemchuk hater. I still would have brought him here without even any real questions at all. I kind of feel bad, though, with the World Juniors being in Ottawa this year. The Yakemchuk isn't there. That was the Sens' one chance to have a big-time prospect on a major team, but that's just the way it goes. Now we go on to a couple of players here that I wasn't really surprised to see off the preliminary roster. The first one is Michael Hage, unfortunately. I think he could have been invited, but I also do believe that with Canada and how many good transitional players they have that are older and have proved it for longer than Hage, that I wasn't really surprised to see him off the roster. I still would have invited him, but considering the talent that Canada has, I could see why. Though I don't think that is an indictment on Hage whatsoever. He has been brilliant offensively for Michigan this year, 17 points in 13 games. In terms of merit, you could absolutely put him there and put him in that preliminary roster. I think he could have deserved that spot, but it wasn't really surprising to see it off, and especially with just everything we were hearing around Canada's lack of interest around him. No surprise to not see him here. Another one is Nick Lardis, who in terms of goal scoring ability and the consistency is unbelievable. He's somebody that with Brantford has just been dynamic. 24 goals in 24 games this year after putting 29 in 37 games last season. But in terms of more than that goal scoring ability, more than that power play ability, I could understand why Canada would want to bring more balanced players. I don't think Lardis would have been up to that top 6 snuff. I don't think he would have been up to that level, and I don't think he's the type of player you want in bottom 6 or as your extra forward. So I could understand them not even inviting him, and it is a shame because I think he could bring some good goal scoring, but it just wasn't meant to be. Now the thing is, I can go up and down this roster. I can make complaints, surprises, snubs, and everything, but at the end of the day, I still think Canada is the favorite for this tournament, even though they made so many multiple moves that I would never even have imagined they would make. I still think they're the favorites. You still got so many unbelievable forwards there that are going to be dynamic, like Jaeger, like Wood, and even the newcomers like Porter Martone, and especially Gavin McKenna, who is going to be brilliant in this tournament. And you still got on that defense players like Sam Dickinson, who I think are absolutely elite. Matthew Schaefer could come in a major role. Tanner Molendyke is brilliant. Oliver Bongo brings some good moments. The real thing that I think holds this team back, though, is the goaltending, where I don't think they have any clear number one. I would personally have Carter George in that spot, but he hasn't had the greatest Team Canada reputation in the world. He's somebody that has had his inconsistencies. So for them, they're not really in any clear number one type of mode. Meanwhile, for the US, they have a Trey Augustine, who is far and away the best goaltender in this tournament. So that is going to be a clear advantage for them. So I think goaltending is really the only thing that can sink this Canada team, or I guess the decisions they made. Even with all that said, though, I still think they're the favorite. I still think they have the most firepower and some of the greatest depth that you could ever possibly work with. So we'll see what they end up doing. Even though I think there were some baffling moves, in the end, it might not even matter. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on this Canada roster and the major decisions that they made, if there's going to be consequences for that, and your thoughts on this Canada roster. Did you think they were cooking with it? Do you think they made some major losses? I would love to hear your thoughts down below on who you think should have been on the roster, who you think shouldn't have been. Let me know everything down below. And of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you guys haven't already, and share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all my World Juniors talk right in one playlist. And of course, make sure you sign up to BetUS using code U2150, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.